Welcome to our presentation on representation of race in America, applying critical media literacy strategies. This is a presentation by Sarah Anderson, Victor Sanchez, Joe Hazley, and Olivia Stewart. So critical media literacy as defined by Doug Kellner and Jeff Scher. Critical media literacy aims to analyze and understand the power structures that shape the media representation and the ways in which audiences work to make meaning through dominant, oppositional, and negotiated readings of media. For our topic, we are going to examine how Black people, and specifically Black men, are represented in news and literature and how this shapes the public's perception. The goal for our lesson plan, after completing our lesson, students will be able to apply critical media literacy strategies to analyze literature, news, and other forms of media regarding the topic of race and representation in America. Students will be able to collaborate with one another to research and analyze the topic of race and representation. Students will be able to collaborate and create their own multimedia in response to our critical media literacy questions. And finally, students will be able to discern between credible and untrustworthy sources of information in order to develop their own informed opinions.
So for a brief, just general overview of the lesson itself, we would start with an introduction to Kellner and Scher's 6 conceptual understandings, highlighting the importance of media and audience and information and power. Addressed within those conceptual understandings. Then we would take some passages from texts which the students had previously read, specifically To Kill a Mockingbird and A Lesson Before Dying. We would have students discuss those texts and those specific passages in relation to the conceptual understandings, addressing questions like how does the media and audience of the novel themselves, as well as those aspects involved in the internal narrative, influence what and how the messages are conveyed and to whom, and how the messages themselves display power dynamics in both the text and society. Subsequent to that, in small groups, the students would find articles about George Floyd from varying media perspective based on a media chart, which we will show you shortly. Then the students would apply Kellner and Scher's conceptual understandings to those articles. And then after they had done that, as the small group, they would compare and contrast how these conceptual understandings and the role of media and audience, as well as information and power, were displayed in similar or different ways based on the analysis of the previous text as well. And then the final product would be a podcast that the groups create, discussing the ideas and thoughts about what the application of Kellner and Scher's conceptual understandings showed about the literary text, as well as news articles, including similarities, differences, and that would be the entirety of the lesson.
Move on here.
So basically, the goal of our lesson, here's a quote from Kellner and Scher again, is students are taught to value the aesthetic qualities of media and the arts while using their creativity for self-expression through creating art and media. And these programs can be found most often inside schools and standalone classes or outside the classroom in community-based or after-school programs. And then copied here are several 11th grade Minnesota English language arts standards that we hope that students would be able to master through this lesson. So basically, they're able to cite strong and thorough textual evidence to support analysis. They can read widely to understand multiple perspectives and pluralistic viewpoints. That's a very important one to this lesson. And then they can determine an author's point of view, integrate and evaluate multiple sources of information, and then also evaluate a speaker's point of view, reasoning, intended audience, and use of evidence and rhetoric. So that one's really important to kind of distinguish the speaker versus the author and how they can be different. And then lastly, to understand, analyze, evaluate, and use different types of print, digital and multimodal media. So videos, other news sources like printed articles, and they can kind of see what they mean.
Here we have just sort of a breakdown of Kellner and Scher's understandings, the kind of highlight some aspects to consider when critiquing a text, broken them into the two main categories that they discuss in the text, media and audiences, as well as information and power, and how those relate and what are good questions to use while evaluating a text.
So to achieve the goals of our lesson, we would ask students to create their own podcast using an app called Anchor, which is produced by Spotify. Everything a student might need to create their own podcast is located within the app. Some of the most useful affordances include the clearly labeled tabs, a device-centered microphone, and sharing capabilities. Students probably aren't expert podcasters yet, so the clearly labeled tabs make navigating the app a breeze. Specifically, the tabs for music, interludes, and sounds are especially helpful because they don't require a student to import these things from other apps. Furthermore, students probably don't have professional quality microphones on hand, but it's likely that they have personal technology devices or devices provided by the school that have microphones. This app takes away the need for a studio space to create their podcasts and allows students to create their own media from wherever they have Wi-Fi access. Finally, the sharing and interactive capabilities of Anchor are essential to student success. Once a podcast is finished, students can choose to post it on the Anchor platform. From there, students can share a link to their Anchor podcast and receive real-time analytics about who is listening to their work. Anchor also allows for audio comments on podcasts, which can be used in subsequent podcasts to come a way to interact with the audience. Anchor allows students to collaborate with each other on the same podcast at the same time, which allows for things like interviews or discussions to be recorded right in the app with limited hassle. I think these affordances allow students to create the media with limited pre-existing knowledge while also encouraging them to seek out diverse perspectives and collaborative knowledge building.
All right, moving on, we're going to start to demo our lesson a little bit. I'm going to be the teacher. I'm going to have student 1, Joe, if you could read that first passage about To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah, absolutely. Gentlemen, he said. Gemini looked at each other. Atticus might have said scout. His voice had lost all aridity, its detachment, and he was talking to the jury as if they were folks on the post office corner. Gentlemen, he was saying, I shall be brief, but I would like to use my remaining time with you to remind you that this case is not a difficult one. It requires no minute sifting of complicated facts, but it does require you to be sure beyond all reasonable doubt as to the guilt of the defendant. To begin with, this case should never have come to trial. This case is as simple as black and white. The state has not produced one iota of medical evidence to the effect that the crime Tom Robinson is charged with ever took place. It has relied instead upon the testimony of 2 witnesses whose evidence has not only been called into serious question on cross-examination, but has been flatly contradicted by the defendant. The defendant is not guilty, but somebody in this courtroom is. I have nothing but pity in my heart for the chief witness for the state, but my pity does not extend so far as to her putting a man's life at stake, which she has done in an effort to get rid of her own guilt. I say guilt, gentlemen, because it was guilt that motivated her. She has committed no crime. She has merely broken a rigid and time-honored code of our society, a code so severe that whoever breaks it is hounded from our midst as unfit to live with. She is the victim of cruel poverty and ignorance, but I cannot pity her. She is white. She knew full well the enormity of her offense, but because her desires were stronger than the code she was breaking, she persisted in breaking it. She persisted, and her subsequent reaction is something that all of us have known at one time or another. She did something every child has done. She tried to put the evidence of her offense away from her, but in this case, she was no child hiding stolen contraband. She struck out at her victim. Of necessity, she must put him away from her. She must be removed from her presence, from this world. She must destroy the evidence of her offense. What was the evidence of her offense? Tom Robinson, a human being. She must put Tom Robinson away from her. Tom Robinson was her daily reminder of what she did. And what did she do? She tempted a black man. She was white and she tempted a black man. She did something that in our society is unspeakable. She kissed a black man. Not an old uncle, but a strong young black man. No code mattered to her before she broke it, but it came crashing down on her afterwards. Her father saw it, and the defendant has testified as to his remarks. What did her father do? We don't know. But there is circumstantial evidence to indicate that Mayala Ewell was beaten savagely by someone who led almost exclusively with his left. Who do we know in part what Mr. Ewell did? He did what any God-fearing, persevering, respectable white man would do under the circumstances. He swore out a warrant, no doubt signing it with his left hand, and Tom Robinson now sits before you, having taken the oath with the only good hand he possesses, his right hand. And so a quiet, respectable, humble black man who had the unmitigated temerity to feel sorry for a white woman has had to put his word against two white people's. I need not remind you of their appearance and conduct on the stand. You saw them for yourself.
Thank you for reading that. If you could please answer, why was this text created and or shared from the author's point of view, as well as the main character?
Yeah, I guess the author probably wanted to talk about how a white person was honorable by representing a black person in a trial. Seems like that's what the author's trying to get at, but I don't know if that's true, because when you think about in the actual text in the actual trial, Tom Robinson isn't given much agency. It's all about the white people and how this affected them and how he's just this big victim of circumstance. So he doesn't really seem to have any role in it, even though really he has the biggest role in it.
Thank you. The next quote, the other passage from A Lesson Before Dying. Olivia, if you could read that, please.
Yeah, of course. Jefferson, I said. We had started walking. Do you know what a hero is, Jefferson? A hero is someone who does something for other people. He does something that other men don't and can't do. He is different from other men. He is above other men. No matter who those other men are, the hero, no matter who he is above them. I lowered my voice again until we had passed the table. I could never be a hero. I teach, but don't like teaching. I teach because it is the only thing that an educated black man can do in the South today. I don't like it. I hate it. I don't even like living here. I want to run away. I want to live for myself and for my woman and for nobody else. That is not a hero. A hero does for others. He would do anything for people he loves because he knows it would make their lives better. I am not that kind of person, but I want you to be. You could give something to her, to me, to those children in the quarter. You could give them something that I never could. They expect it from me, but not from you. The white people out there are saying that you don't have it, that you're a hog, not a man. But I know that they are wrong. You have the potential. We all have, no matter who we are. Those out there are no better than we are, Jefferson. They're worse. That's why they're always looking for a scapegoat, someone else to blame. I want you to show them the difference between what they think you are and what you can be. To them, you're nothing but another. No dignity, no heart, no love for your people. You can prove them wrong. You can do more than I can ever do. I've always done what they wanted me to do, teach reading, writing, and arithmetic, nothing else. Nothing about dignity, nothing about identity, nothing about loving and caring. I never thought we were capable of learning these things, teach those, how to print their names and how to figure on their fingers. And I went along, but hating myself all the time for doing so. We were coming up to the table again, and the ones at the table were quiet and trying to hear what we were saying. I did not start talking again until we had passed them. Do you know what a myth is, Jefferson? I asked him. A myth is an old lie that people believe in. White people believe that they're better than anyone else on the earth, and that's a myth. The last thing they ever want is to see a black man stand and think and show that common humanity that is in us all. It would destroy their myth. They would no longer have justification for having made us slaves and keeping us in the condition we're in. As long as none of us stand, they're safe. They're safe with me. They're safe with Reverend Ambrose. I don't want them to feel safe with you anymore. I want you to chip away at that myth by standing. I want you, yes you, to call them. I want you to show them that you are as much a man, more a man than they can ever be. That jury, you call them men, That judge, is he a man? The governor is no better. They play by the rules of their forefathers that their forefathers created hundreds of years ago. Their forefathers said that we're only 3/5 human, and they leave it to this day. Sheriff Gidry does too. He calls me professor, but he doesn't mean it. He calls Reverend Ambrose Reverend, but he doesn't respect him. When I showed him the notebook and pencil I brought you, he grinned. Do you know why? He believes it was just a waste of time and money. What can a hog do with a pencil and paper? We stopped. His head was down. Look at me, Jefferson, please, I said. He raised his head. He had been crying. He raised his cuffed hands and wiped one eye and then the other. I need you, I told him. I need you much more than you could ever need me. I need to know what to do with my life. I want to run away, but go where and do what? I'm needed here and I know it, but I feel that all I'm doing here is choking myself. I need someone to tell me what to do. I need you to tell me, to show me. I'm no hero. I can just give you something small. That's all I have to offer. It is the only way that we can chip away at that myth. You. You can be bigger than anyone you have ever met. Please listen to me, because I would not lie to you now. I speak from my heart. You have the chance of being bigger than anyone who has ever lived on that plantation or come from this little town. You can do it if you try. You've seen how Mr. Farrell makes a slingshot handle. He starts with just a little piece of rough wood, any little piece of scrap wood. Then he starts cutting. Cutting and cutting and cutting, then shaving. Shaves it down clean and smooth till it's not what it was before, but something new and pretty. You know what I'm talking about because you have seen him do it. You had one that he made from a piece of scrap wood. Yes, I saw you with it. And it came from a piece of old wood that he found in the yard somewhere. And that's all we are, Jefferson, all of us on this earth, a piece of drifting wood, until we, each one of us individually, decide to become something else. I am still that piece of drifting wood, and those out there are no better. But you can be better, because we need you to be and want you to be. Me, your godmother, the children, and all the rest of them in the quarter. Do you understand what I'm saying to you, Jefferson? Do you? He looked at me in great pain. He may not have understood, but something was touched, something deep down in him, because he was still crying. I cry, not from reaching any conclusion by reasoning, but because, lowly as I am still part of the whole. Is that what he was thinking as he looked at me crying? Come on, I said, let's have some gumbo. And we went back to the table.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Joe. Why was this text created or shared?
So I think from the perspective of the author, it probably would have been necessary for Ernest Gaines to write a story by a Black man about a Black man, because too often literature in the canon is written from a perspective that doesn't honor the people that are being written about. And then I think the speaker in this passage actually says pretty clearly what he thinks his goal here is, and that is to like disseminate the myths of racism. And I think like in part you could say that that's the author's goal too, but specifically it comes out when the speaker says that he wants to disseminate the myth that white people are better than Black people.
Excellent. Thank you. Victor, after thinking about those two passages that Joe and Olivia read from two different books, is there any modern examples you can think of that relate to any of these?
Yeah, there's two that immediately come to mind. The most, maybe not the most, but the kind of the biggest one that comes to mind is the death of George Floyd, which occurred in May of this year, where a Black man was killed by Minneapolis police during an arrest. And then immediately you kind of saw the news outlets and the news media portray George Floyd in one of two ways. More conservative media portrayed George Floyd as a criminal, and really kind of dwelled on some of his past criminal background of kind of petty larceny and some of these smaller crimes. Even the police report, I think, said that George Floyd was he was violent and combative, which I think that turned out to not be the case per the video. And then kind of more liberal media outlets, or maybe even more center-leaning outlets, didn't so much dwell on George Floyd's criminal past and more so on what actually occurred when he was killed. The other example that I can think of that comes to mind is the shooting of he's still alive, was Jeff Blake in Wisconsin, another unarmed black man that was shot in the back by Wisconsin police. He did not die, but he is paralyzed. In that, again, you saw that same dynamic where some news outlets really dwelled on, he was there for a crime, he had domestic abuse charges, while other outlets kind of focused more on the actions of the police and what was perceived to be an act of racism. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you. And moving forward, an assignment I'd like you to create, and you will be in groups of 3. Each group member is responsible for one news media outlet source. There was going to be some that are more left, more right, and then some that are pretty centered politically. So the 3 of you are going to come up and you're going to have to discuss your article based on the author's point of view and that news media point of view. So don't think about your own point of view, but whatever the author of the text is saying. And then you guys are going to have a conversation based on the author's point of views in this podcast about different situations. In this case, we're talking about George Floyd's death. Any questions?